I want to start out by talking about bedtime resistance and night wakings, and then we'll talk a little bit about some of the work we've done in our research and our results, and then kind of conclude with where do we go from here? And I'd love to get your input on that, and then we'll wrap up with any last questions and answers. So sleep resistance, it's a very popular topic in the literature. There's been a lot of emphasis on different methods. You might have heard extinction used, or modified extinction, or bedtime fading with parental presence. So I'll try to use those terms as I go along so that you understand, if you read books, what I'm talking about or where these are coming from. But I'll also just talk about the general technique. So when we talk about sleep resistance, we're talking about a child who's really fussy and resisting and not wanting to go to bed, and this can take the form of just being fussy or crying or screaming or whatever. It can be pretty extreme, and it's very helpful. It's very challenging, particularly in a child who has limited verbal skills, to understand exactly what's going on. But there are different strategies that will work, and the first is to really go back and think about daytime habits. I think Osmond's point was very well taken. Don't forget about the daytime. So be thinking about, is there anything I can do during the day with exercise, with minimizing light, with minimizing caffeine, because that will feed into bedtime resistance. The other thing that we mentioned was the timing of sleep, and making sure that sleep isn't too early, and also that sleep is at a consistent time every day. That will allow the child's melatonin levels to kick in, their natural melatonin levels to kick in. So what I have not put up here is extinction. Extinction, or at least complete extinction, is been referred to in the literature as letting the child cry it out. And I don't want to make it sound like it doesn't work. It does work in certain situations. It does work oftentimes in typically developing children. And I even have colleagues who work in sleep and autism who say that it's very effective in autism as long as the parents will buy into it. With that said, I have not found it particularly useful in my practice or when I give workshops to talk about having the child in the room, they're making a fuss, the parent is instructed to leave and let the child settle themselves and go to sleep. And the reason I haven't had a lot of success with it is the parents are not that inclined to do it, they're not that excited about it, and I'm not sure it works for every child. I mean, a child who's very anxious, a child who's nonverbal and can't articulate what's scaring them or what's stimulating them, it really puts some barriers up. And I think that as parents of children with disabilities, we're prone to not want to do anything that might harm our child or cause our child to have distress. So what I found over the years is it's not a strategy that I use very readily. There's something called modified extinction. Oh, and you may be wondering, what does extinction mean? Where did it get the word extinction? Extinction has to do with taking a behavior that's been going on, that's been learned, and extinguishing it. So extinguishing, for example, the child's calling out and needing the parent to be there. So modified extinction is a form of the same thing, but you're letting the parent go back in at hopefully increasing intervals of time. And one of the ways that this has been worked out in a way that works for the parents, works for the child, is to say, excuse me, and to say to the child, whether they're verbal or not, oh, excuse me, I forgot something, and to leave and then to come back a few minutes later. And this makes it, I think, a little bit easier for parents to swallow. And again, I've had people tell me this works, and it even works in autism. So it's one option. What what we've found over the years and what we've put in our book is we do recommend that we sometimes can try modified extinction. So, that the child is in the room, the parent leaves, they come back, but they let some time pass before they come back. You let that time be longer and longer. At first it may be just a few seconds, and then it's longer and longer, and the child learns how to fall asleep. As an alternative, though, to either complete extinction or modified extinction is something called parental presence with fading. So I call it the rocking chair method. And what it is having the parent in the room, but with their back or at least their side to the child. So that the child sees the parent, the child is comforted by the parent. The parent is comforted that they haven't abandoned their child. The parent's sitting in a comfortable chair. It could be a rocking chair, it could just be a regular chair, but it's something comfortable. The parent has a book or a magazine with them. And the parent is prepared to know this may not happen overnight. This may be several days. It may take a little bit of time for this to work, but it will eventually work. Best to maybe not do this the next day that the parent has something important at work if they work outside the home, or even on a weekday. Maybe do it on a Friday night or a Saturday night to start. And the idea is that the child falls asleep, but the parent is in the room with the child aware that the parent is in the room. And then the parent, if the child starts calling out, can say, go to sleep, time for sleep, something very calm, something reassuring, but not a long discussion or anything that reinforces the child, but is still present. And then over time can move the chair closer and closer to the door until they're out of the door. A modification is if the child is co-sleeping and the parent would like to eliminate the co-sleeping, it can be done with a mattress. So the child's mattress and the parent's mattress are next to each other, or the parent lies on the bed next to the child or on the floor next to the child, and then gradually moves away until the parent is out of the room. So it's a gradual fading of parental presence. The parent needs to stay calm, but it's oftentimes easier and less guilt-provoking than the traditional forms of extinction. So that's one thing we do. This works regardless of the level of the child in terms of their verbal skills. One thing we really try to do, particularly with the kids who have language, is institute some sort of morning present, morning sticker, basket of presents, some sort of reward. Also telling a story about, we need sleep, everybody in the family sleeps, your dog sleeps, your cat sleeps, your doll sleeps, and kind of explaining that everybody needs to kind of sleep in their own room and learn how to fall asleep on their own. And that can make a big difference. Sometimes we'll have the child have a doll, and we'll have the child put the doll to bed, learn how to teach their doll to fall asleep on their own without them present, and then the family can learn, the child can learn how to fall asleep without their parent present. And a first step in minimizing night wakings, the other big concept I wanted to get across is to help the child fall asleep on his or her own. And this is this principle. Mark Durand has talked about it. It's called back to bed, or first, it's basically begin at bedtime. So the idea is that a child who can fall asleep on his or her own can go back to sleep on their own, just like us. The idea that anything we've become dependent on to fall asleep may not be there when we wake up. So the classic story for the adult is the TV. We fall asleep with the TV on, and then we wake up, and if the TV isn't on, we become fully awake. We wake up many times a night. We are not aware we're waking up. We go right back to sleep. And so it is with our kids. They wake up, they go right back to sleep. But what will keep somebody from going right back to sleep is missing whatever they had when they fell asleep. So an item that we're dependent on or our kids are dependent on, if it's not there when we wake up, we're more apt to turn that wake up into a permanent wake up rather than a falling back to sleep. So responding quickly to distress, comforting and reassuring, yet remembering to keep the interactions fairly brief and fairly boring so there's no reinforcement for the child, or avoid over-responding to subtle little noises that might be coming from the monitor. Do allow the child to kind of soothe themselves back to sleep whenever they can. Use visual reminders. And that could be repeating part of the bedtime. If need be, repeating part of the bedtime routine. Choosing realistic goals. Sometimes a realistic goal is not, a child who's co-sleeping, who's still having a lot of resistance and a lot of night wakings. Maybe you don't move into a different bedroom right away. You still allow the co-sleeping to go on, but you work with the parent to institute a calming bedtime routine and get that in place first before you work on the co-sleeping. And then pairing with rewards. I wanted to say one more thing before I go on to the bedtime pass about this. This is where the kids who are overly sedated on medicines, it can get you into trouble because they're so used to falling asleep with the medicines that when they try to, go back to sleep when they wake up at night, they're not able to because they never learned how to fall asleep on their own. So that's where actually decreasing medicines at night to promote sleep. Let's say a child is taking several medicines at night to fall asleep. They fall asleep fine because they're pretty much sedated from all of these medicines, but then they're waking up consistently every night and they can't get back to sleep. Actually working on decreasing some of the medicines and instituting a bedtime routine at bedtime, even though you might not think they need it and the parents might not think they need it because they're falling asleep fine at bedtime with these meds, instituting the bedtime routine and then trying to cut out some of these meds can be extremely effective because the meds are interfering with their ability to learn how to fall asleep on their own. And then when they wake up in the middle of the night, it's because they haven't learned how to fall asleep on their own. Does that make sense? Okay. Question? I'm sorry, if a child... Oh, like the mom or the dad? Yeah. That's a really good question. So if the child prefers one of the parents, what will oftentimes happen is like one of the parents will be stricter and then the child will be smart enough to realize to go to that other parent. That's where really, getting the parents together and taking time to talk to your spouse and working through that. It's easier said than done. It works well if the parents are in the same house and household. In the cases of separated parents, it's been really problematic, but we still try to get them together so that they have, a consistent routine. So the child is doing the same thing regardless of which household they're in.
Because, if his dad puts him to sleep, he just screams bloody murder. It takes forever to go to sleep, but then if I go, he's out. So my husband will say, you do it.
But let me make sure I understand this. If you put him to bed, you have to be the one who has to go up when he wakes up. Oh, okay. And tell me, when he goes to bed at night, does he have a bedtime routine? And he is. Okay, and he's falling asleep well at night? Okay, good. But they're not frequent. They're once in a while.
Yeah, but sometimes it's really loud.
Yeah. You might want to look. It sounds like what you're doing, though, is effective because he is able to go back to sleep when he sees you. Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay, so you need to find something else to get your husband to do to make it up to you. It could be laundry. It could be dishes. I'll let you work on that. But in this case... Just think of something you really hate doing, that he can do in that place. Yes?
Would using the melatonin or the
Gabapentin?
in conjunction to facilitate the extension, would that be useful?
Yes. It certainly can be. I think the trickiest part with using these meds, regardless of whether you're going to do modified extinction or the rocking chair or whatever, the biggest challenge is to use them to facilitate and not use them to sedate. In other words, if you use them to overly sedate to the point that the child doesn't learn how to fall asleep on their own, it's going to be hard to take them away, and even worse, it might not help with the night wakings. So the challenge is to use enough of a dose that kind of takes the edge off and allows the child to calm down and fall asleep on their own. But you want them to do the process of falling asleep on their own. You don't want the medicine to kind of help them fall asleep on their own. In other words, it can facilitate it, but you want it to be ultimately the child falling asleep. And it's tricky to know what that is, but it's using too much, it's using the right amount of medicine, not too much medicine. My experience over the years has been that people use too much medicine, or they come to you on too much medicine because most of the pediatricians, and even unfortunately the sleep specialists, and again, I'm not talking about Vancouver, I'm talking about our country, most of the physicians and most of the sleep specialists tend to over-medicate and not necessarily work with these behavioral principles.